One person who no doubt would have been looking at this in great detail is a mind-body analyst, in other words, somebody who looks at the body language of people. Suzanne Masefield is with me. Good morning and thanks for your time this morning.
Good morning, Chris. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Nice to have you back on the program. What did you make of this? Because when I was looking at Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un, what was apparently or abundantly clear is the minute Kim was required to have a photo taken, he went from smiley Kim to very serious Kim. And I wondered what that all means.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting observation from a body language point of view, and it was a good balance from both of them between power, diplomacy, both of them being conciliatory and building rapport. So that initial connection where they shook hands, I mean, that was got to be one of the longest handshakes in history, 12 seconds. It's pretty long. And then Donald Trump actually, touching his arm, that's a connection point. A lot of the Asian cultures, touch is actually not something you do, and certainly not with a big leader. So that builds intimacy, but it's also very much a power stance. And they switched from being Donald Trump touching, and then Kim Jong Un would touch Donald Trump's back. So there were definitely, these subtle power things going on underneath, but it was very obvious that they wanted to have a connection, and they had a lot of mirroring body language. The formal, the way that a lot of the Asian culture is, where it's very formal for a photograph, to show power, you don't smile. Smiling is not a power stance. So I think that was probably why he did that, but. Yeah, I mean, they did a lot of mirroring body language around the table where they signed, and it was interesting because Donald Trump shook hands with Kim after they signed the declaration, and he gave him a palm up gesture, which is a conciliatory gesture, and it's usually something that people give other people from a state of reverence with your elders, but. So he let Kim have the upper hand, but then he pulled him in and yanked him in. So there was this push-me-pull-you going on the whole time about who's on top, who's not on top. But, really it was two leaders showing their power, but also showing their willingness to connect and be diplomatic with each other. I mean, even the languaging that Trump used, it's an honor. He kept saying it's an honor, and we will do this. There was power alongside that conciliatory. So I think from a body language perspective, it was a very constructive meeting.
It looked like to me that Donald Trump had the balance of power, but then again, Suzanne, I often think that or wonder because he's much taller than the North Korean dictator. And I also understand that at some point, Kim Jong-un's officials actually wanted to make sure when the meeting took place, they were on an even standing height. So they actually wanted some kind of podium for Kim to stand on. That never happened. Do you think, when we look at the difference with heights there, it is all about power, isn't it? Or is it just because Donald Trump's taller, he looked like he had the balance of power?
Yeah, it's just because he's taller. And at the end of the day, power doesn't necessarily come from, size. If you spread your body, status, they did a lot of power struts where you actually make your body bigger. That doesn't necessarily mean taller, but if you're actually grounded, and you're actually very solidly in your body, you can exude that sense of power whether you're tall or not. Sometimes people, when they're taller, they're trying to compensate for that and they can be off balance and then they lose their power. So really height, although on first appearances seems like it makes a difference, it doesn't need to with body language.
I often wonder, Suzanne, how much work or even rehearsal went in with both gentlemen, on both sides to be fair, about the handshake and what goes on, because there would be rehearsals, wouldn't there? They would be really thinking about how this happens. And I say that because when Donald Trump went to shake Kim Jong-un's hand for the first time, after he did that, he then moved in with his left hand and puts it on his shoulder. That, right. Once again, that's a technique of power, isn't it? Or showing that it's nice to meet you, but I'm in control of the situation.
Definitely. And he actually squeezed the top of his arm. That area is an intimate zone. So, most people in these situations would rehearse. If you think about Donald Trump's behavior generally, he goes in guns blazing and doesn't actually do any rehearsal. It's very instinctive. And a lot of the meetings that he has with other politicians, he does exactly the same thing. He has that strong grip and he pulls them in towards him, which he didn't do on this first meeting, but he always touches. And that is, I always say when I'm training people is he who touches last wins. He who pats last wins. That's generally how it is in the power stakes. And, they're vying at different times to make sure that they both pat. Whether that's conscious or unconscious, the conscious aspect of it is to maintain each of them to maintain power whilst trying to, engage in some sort of rapport and diplomacy.
Suzanne, after the handshake took place, both leaders then sat down and answered very brief questions from the media. And I noticed, and I know you've spoken about this in the past, I think, when Donald Trump was listening to Kim Jong Un briefly speak, and when Trump was speaking himself too, his hands were in that kind of upside-down triangle position. Yeah. So he wasn't clutching his hands, but they were certainly... What does that mean? I know that means something, but I can't think what it actually means.
Yeah, it's called a steeple. And
that's right, thank you.
Confidence. When it's inverted and placing down, they're showing their sense of power, but they're also showing that they're prepared to listen. If the closer that is up towards the face, the less likely they are to listen. So, again, it's that, here I am, I'm powerful, I've centered myself, but I am prepared to listen. So, yeah, and a very wide leg stance, which, again, a lot of leaders have. They take up a lot of space, a lot of status there.
I don't know if I'm reading too much into this here, but when both leaders were sitting down, a metre apart from each other, when Donald Trump had that steeple position, Kim Jong Un looked almost uncomfortable, like he had sat down. He tried to lean into the president to give that sense of friendship, but he looked like he almost wanted to get out of his seat as well. For me, he came across as looking unsure of himself, slightly uncomfortable. Or am I reading too much into that?
No, I don't think you are. I mean, body language is generally a reflection of everything we're thinking and feeling. Kim Jong Un at that particular point had actually his hands in a clasp and then moved literally like he wanted to move on.
Yeah.
Trump really took the leadership role almost like a fatherly aspect initially. And I think it sort of threw Kim off balance, but he kept trying to regain his power. So, yeah, I don't think he was comfortable with that. I mean, he doesn't do a lot of, this is a really big deal. I mean, he's probably thinking in his head, what am I doing? I'm giving my power away. He's been holding on. You don't know what's going on in these people's minds at the end of the day. But you do. It's very clear what's happening with Trump. He's determined that this is going to happen and that he will be given credibility for this, which is great if it happens.
The handshake was long. It was quite, well, not uncomfortably long, but it was long. Is this part of the act? Is this all part of the power play?
Yeah, it can be. Some cultures do hold on the hands longer. Certainly in the Middle East, people continue shaking hands for a very long time, and sometimes they continue holding hands, between two males, which is, quite unusual. I think in this particular instance, they had a lot of cameras there. I think it was really to, Donald Trump, and I think he had the upper hand in this particular instance. Was making sure that people knew, we're in charge, I'm in charge, this is going to happen, and make sure that you see that we are actually shaking hands because this is a momentous occasion, which it is.
Also with body language, I know you're an absolute expert in this, body language, when you actually have to feel like you have to go one way or another to act a body language, your mind eventually starts to feel that too. So one after the other sometimes, right?
Yeah, I mean, it can work both ways. You've got that unconscious aspect of tells that you give away, that if you know what to look for, people can actually read what's going on for you. But also you can act it and then start to feel it, that if you stand in power poses and things like that, you can, it actually does change your body stance. It changes your body chemistry and you increase your testosterone within about 2 minutes. So it's very, very fast. So you can sort of do the body language first and then feel it. So, it can work either way round, basically.
What I found fascinating, and I think you just alluded to this at the top of the interview, and that was Kim Jong Un's body language. He was copying what Donald Trump would do. When Donald Trump would pat him on the back, then Kim would do the same thing.
Yep.
Does that suggest that Kim really wanted to show his affection or respect for Donald Trump, or in fact really did respect him?
I think, when people mirror each other's body language, it generally means that they're in rapport. When we like people, we tend to often have similar body language and, move our positions into the similar places. I think initially this is you've done a bit of power, I've done a bit of power. Again, how much of it's conscious and how much of it's natural. But certainly when they were sitting around the tables, their body language was very, very mirrored, which is a really good indication of they're in rapport, they are building trust, there is a connection there, which, for this sort of thing is a good thing.
Fascinating to see, that's for sure. Really interesting. And fascinating to have you back on the program, Suzanne Masefield, body mind analyst. You've got a good website too, don't you?
I do, thebodylanguagecompany.com, and there's some free things about how to increase your attraction and things like that, which are always very helpful in business or personally.
Always on your website. Nice to speak with you. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Chris.
Cheers.
Bye.